So I'm here with two friends from the city, two highly regarded coffee professionals, aficionados. Maybe you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Barnett. I'm the founder and owner of Linea Cafe in San Francisco.
My name is Ant Walach, and I'm the roaster at Linea Café in San Francisco.
And with the three of us, we're here to do a little roasting experiment, I guess.
Yeah.
We have a coffee from my own farm, from La Mula farm in Panama. It's a Sundried natural geisha. And this year I've been doing a lot of experimentation with this coffee, which is an interesting bean because it kind of has this combination of, on one side it's very hard, it's a very dense bean, and on the other side it has the geisha, it's of the geisha variety, so the bean structure is kind of open, so you have kind of two opposing parameters that will have an impact on the roast profile. The density of the coffee can withhold or can withstand a lot of heat, and then the open structure of the bean allows heat to penetrate relatively easy. So tricky. This is a coffee that throws you curveballs all the time. So we're now 1 minute 30 seconds in this roast, and we're keeping track of the time temperature profile in the good old manual way, nothing computerized here at this point. Andrew, what have your observations been so far with the previous roast that you did?
I felt that this coffee, first off, the aromatics of this coffee are phenomenal. And it's really beautiful coffee. And I felt that in the previous roast that we had been a little too aggressive in the development, and that this coffee would probably showcase better with a little more delicate finesse roast, a little lighter on the development.
And we're roasting this for pour over or for cupping color, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so I'm roasting it at 4.5 inches, a little bit higher than 4.5. So that's in relation to the capacity of this machine is about 65% of the heat capacity, and we're roasting it at 300 grams, which is about 70% of the capacity of the machine. And so the first minutes really, did we already see it bottom out?
Yeah, 274.
So it bottomed out at 274. Andrew, what's your opinion on the importance of the bottoming out point when it relates to roasting? Do you have any opinion on it?
I just observe it and I know it.
Yeah, and
for
that's
you?
a good point. No, I observe it and I notice it and I usually keep track of it, but I don't feel that the bottoming out point has a significant importance for the chemistry or for the flavor profile of the coffee. Apart from that, it's a point that you want to keep into consideration when following the time temperature profile. So, what do we smell now, guys?
It's more hay, grass, maybe.
Yeah, I think.
A little bit.
Are we maybe in the transition point from grass towards hay?
Yes.
Yeah, so we're now at 292 environmental, 335, something like that. 292 bean, 335 environmental, and 4.5 minutes. And so I would say we're going to try to get a sequence of these aromatic milestones of, let's say, 1.5 minutes, 90 seconds in between them, so that we can hopefully expect the very first start of the first crack around 9 minutes, in that range. So we're now going towards I would say going towards hay, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that we are around hay right now. 301 bean temperature, 345 environmental, 5.5 minutes on time. This is the point where the caramelization really starts for the coffee. So, Andrew, what are you looking for when you smell, when you're doing these tests during roasting? So, what is it that goes on in your mind?
I'm always thinking about how does it smell? I mean, first off, but what I'm seeking is something that's sweet, that we're developing the sweetness, and again, we're following the milestones, and I think you develop a sensitivity for each coffee, what it is that you're seeking, and that ultimately it's one of the most important factors in deciding how to develop the coffee is that aromatic.
Yeah.
And
we're using a San Franciscan here. Do you have any observations regarding the San Franciscan, like as a machine type?
I love this machine. So this is what I roasted on from the years 2000 to 2009, and I found that I got great results with this. It was very able to help me to profile my roasts on this unit and develop what I would use in production.
So the next milestone we're looking for is that baking bread milestone. That's a milestone where we're really having this ongoing process of caramelization of sugars, and it's important. This will be at the threshold where we will find this A point. I call it the aromatic point, the A point, for lack of a better word or name. But it's from a chemistry point of view, it's actually a point where the pressure inside the beans starts increasing to the point where there are small fractures in the cell structure of the bean that are starting to opening up, and they call these fractures also. There's a nice word for it. It's basically the fractures. They open up the plasmodesmata, which is the cell walls of the coffee. And at this stage I feel we should reduce the temperature a little bit, or the gas supply. We're going from a 4.5, which was about 70%. I would say we're going down to a 3.5, which is more like a just under 50% heating capacity. This coffee, guys, in my experience, the trick to roast this coffee, as I have found out so far, is not in seeking very complex roasting profiles, but rather to create a relatively balanced and quiet roasting profile without making any major significant adjustments. That has been so far my experience with this coffee.
Is this coffee much different for you than other coffees you've roasted previously? How do you approach it? And how did you develop this roast profile? What was your process?
Yeah, so in general, geisha coffees and sun-dried natural coffees are tricky to roast because the cell structure of a geisha can seem to be quite soft, partially because the beans easily take in heat. So that's always a tricky part. And then the sun-dried natural process, as a process itself, is a process where the beans are being cured and prepared, and they're partially fermenting inside the cherry that's being dried. And that, of course, creates a very interesting distribution of sugars and of all kinds of chemical compounds in the bean. Specifically, the fructose in the bean is allowed to develop or to stay intact in this style. And so to answer your question, my experience has been to let the coffee speak for itself in this process rather than the hand of the roast master who is manipulating the machine. So the roast master has to follow a protocol that's more dictated by the beans rather than the beans follow a protocol that's dictated by the hand of the roast master. Yeah, so and it sounds very simplistic, but that's really what it is. So now we're 10.5 minutes, and now I'm really looking for the onset of the A point, where we smell some aromatics released by the bean. That's usually a very short window, very short time frame, and I hope we can find that time frame now, because that will help us determine also what the real start is of the first crack, and also what the real start is of the roast development time frame. And at that point we very briefly can also, now we hear the very first start of the first crack. So we were not able to exactly pinpoint the A point with this roast. I don't know why, but that's the curveball that this coffee sometimes throws at you. Unfortunately, or fortunately, that also determines the interesting aspect of this coffee. So now we're in first crack. Now the beans are, there was my timer. The beans are now losing some heat, because the heat becomes exothermic. And so I did reduce my gas supply a little bit in order to give us some extra time in the roast development cycle. So we're now very gradually approaching, I would say, a color that would bring us close to where we want to be. And so the tricky part with this La Mula Geisha is that it's such a hard bean coffee ultimately. And hard bean coffees, they are a little bit of a stubborn type of bean. So they don't easily show their true characteristics until you have them in the cup. So I'm going to, so let's together define where we shall call this a roast. I think we are there.
Yeah.
And so that was a 350, 351 at 12 minutes 50 seconds. And I'm very curious how this will turn out. Any observations versus this roast versus the previous one that you guys did on this coffee?
The aromatics are beautiful. This seems a little more finessed on the finish, not quite as dark. And I think the aromatics are even sweeter because of that.
Any observations from you?
I definitely agree to the roast curve of that. It seemed like, I mean, this didn't take off on you. We were definitely finagling it a little bit, the last roast. And it fractures really nicely. The way the beans do.
So we're all eating the beans just to hopefully get a glimpse of what this flavor profile might be. And I also look for the level to which you can easily or not easily bite through these beans, so the brittleness of the coffee helps also to determine the roast point. And so in a few days that we will really know what this coffee will be like, and because it usually is well suited with some resting time.
For this coffee, Willem, what would you advise before an optimal tasting for this?
I would say ideally 72 hours after roasting.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so this is a coffee that keeps us busy, and that's also always the fun with these unique varieties and unique processes.